Owen. This show is one that I do every Tuesday night in which we hang out, do some stuff, and, have a good evening all enjoying our Tuesday nights. I always found that Tuesday was the worst night of the week, and so having something to make your Tuesday just a little bit better. Monday you might still have optimism for the rest of the week, but Tuesday, that optimism's gone and you realize you still got 4 days to go. So hopefully my being a show that you have on your evenings is something that can be something to look forward to. That's my hope anyway. So we chill out. We have a good time. And today, I believe we are going to do some alternate history stuff. Sounds fun, huh? So, who do we have in the who do we got in the chat? We've got some of the Discord regs. Got Hoar and David Chipman. Hoar is like, man, like, my bud, you're gonna watch 2 streams of me in one day. Oh my. Teresa Brown's here. Teresa's becoming a regular. Glitch42, also good. And who else we got? Terry Weaver, Jacob Rodriguez. Yeah, awesome. This is good times. Oh, and Anarcho-Fledgling. And Galaxy Wolfie YT. Congrats, everybody's here. We're all having a good time. Oh, Emperor Alexander, you were there too. You finally got Discord, Glitch42. So you just gotta join the Discord. Yeah, let me get you an invite for the Discord. Let's do that. So, for anybody who doesn't go, StepX got a Discord that you can join up on, which is great. You can join in that way. And who else is in the chat here? Matthew Gerzinkovitz. Yeah, that's a thing. You're going to drink yourself to unconsciousness instead of watching this stream. Well, that's depressing. Why don't you start all your videos with, "Hey YouTube, it your boy T-Dog coming at you." Oh man, all right, let's actually do this. "Hey YouTube, it your boy T-Dog coming at you with another history video. Don't forget to smash like button." Oh my. Wait until you see my Day of the Dead video. I have a little bit of that. Was it my day? Yeah, it was my Day of the Dead video. Or it was... No, it's this week's video. What if the Crusades were just a series of pilgrimages? Oh my, okay. What if the USSR invented the internet first? Interesting. But my RAM is like 8 gigabytes, so it's so lag I can barely type this. Oh, good luck, bud. Oh man, that game, friggin' Stellaris, destroys your memory. I know that. Okay. Let's all right, let's write a few of these down and see where we go. Got to be a little bit more chill. I feel like since I did a stream earlier today and I went to the YouTube space, I've like burnt out my energy reserves and I have to like, keep this one relaxed and chill. So this is going to be like smooth jazz. Smooth jazz. Gonna go to the what if machine. So let's see. What if the iDubbbz won against the AFL? Okay. What if I didn't have chicken for lunch? Well, shit. What if Jesus was non-binary? Oh man, who's to say that they weren't? Jesus could have been non-binary. We don't know. Let's see. Some of these are can be tougher to do than others, but we'll see where it goes. Oh my, you guys have so many. Kaiser Reich. We had... Alright, what if the 3%... Oh my. Okay. So let's take a few of these. You guys have all given me a few already, so let's talk. Let's talk a little bit. First of all, I should mention to you folks that starting next week, so there's some step back changes coming up that I think we should discuss. So first of all, I went to the YouTube space today. And at the YouTube space, I recorded 2 videos. One collaboration that I'm not exactly sure when that's going to go live, but it's a thing that is in progress. And on top of that, we also I also have a bit of an announcement. I've announced this in a few places, but I think I should tell you all because it's an important thing. So if you haven't caught this yet, you should. And that is... Oh my, okay. Keeping track of so many people who want their alternate history scenarios talked about. I'll just keep piling them up and come back to this maybe about once a month or so. This seems like a good thing to do, eh? So the announcement. On November 1st, 2018, there's going to be it's the Thursday, there's going to be a step back video. It's going to be my Day of the Dead special. And after September 1st, or November 1st, I am going to change up how the step back schedule works. And try out a different way of making videos. This is one that I think you guys will like. So I want to tell the whole story behind this because I want to explain everything. So I am trying to figure out... I've always been... Step Back has always been a channel that went through a period of explosive growth in 2016 and then sort of hit this slow, steady increase ever since the fall of 2016. It's been about 1,000 subscribers a month steadily for now, coming on 2 years, which is really good. I'm really happy with it, but it shows that I think anyway, it shows that I've sort of fallen into some sort of a rut. You know, the step back videos have one style. They work one way. They hit a certain length. They have certain types of art. They cover certain types of things, and they're okay. But after cranking out over 100 of them, I think it's time to, shake it up and see what I can do different. So, let's talk about what I want to do and see what you guys think. So, I tried in the summer to retire Quickstep, and you guys showed, nobody said anything, but you guys showed through the numbers, through things like that, that you really wanted Quickstep to stay around, and that's fine. I like it. I think that having a weekly Quickstep thing that talks about things that are contemporary, talk about things that are relatable, and talk about how history affects stuff that's going on like right now is an important series. And so that's going to stay around. I did retire it in for about a month, and people were not happy. I thought I was going to make the step back videos a little bit more contemporary, but that didn't happen. So I brought it back, and everyone's been really liking it so far. So that's going to be a mainstay. Then we've got the main step back videos, you know, the main content of the channel, the thing that we started on. And that's where I'm looking to make the biggest change. So what I'm going to do is, starting on November 1st, or I guess ending on November 1st, step back the main videos, the ones where I explain a history thing on Thursdays, that is going to change format. It's no longer going to be a weekly series, but it is going to be it's going to be sort of hero content, things that get finished, when they're finished. So I'm going to work on the videos, and when they're done, they come out. That's the plan. The quick step videos, which currently come out on Saturdays, are going to start coming out on Thursdays. And I'm going to have because I know there's a lot of people who like the Thursday 1-hour streams that I do before the video comes out on Thursday afternoons. So those are still going to happen. And then the quick step will come out at 2 on Thursdays. And then the step back videos are going to be fairly different. I asked on Twitter, I asked on Discord what people liked about step back and what people wanted to change about step back. And I got the same comment. I got a lot of the same comments, which is that people really liked the research, the quality of the research, and the storytelling. And people, and like the graphics and things like that. And what people didn't like, or what people wanted to change, was mostly stuff to do with presentation, technicality, too much seeing my face, I guess, or something wrong with my face, and they don't like seeing it. So the main thing I'm going to change on that is I'm going to make these videos a lot better. I'm going to make them way more interesting, feature way more cool stuff, hopefully have a lot more art and animation, and my hope is to feature a lot more collaborations and interviews. So I'm going to try and do more interviews with historians and professors as like kind of integrated into the video, and try to get more collaborative work for things like quotations and things like that. And so when these videos come out, the first one I have planned is going to come out on December 1st. They're going to be sort of an event in and of themselves. And so that is the thing I'm going to try and do first. I think you guys will enjoy what I plan on doing. But basically, I'm going to slow down the production of step back videos to make them that was one thing they wanted changes. They wanted them longer and more polished, but they didn't really care. I asked some people, I asked if they were like, all right, long, high quality, or weekly, pick 2. And I've tried every combination except for long and high quality, but not weekly. And so that's going to be the next thing I try, and see if people like it. The first video I'm going to do on this, if anybody knows why December 1st is a significant day, is that December 1st is World AIDS Day. And I'm going to do a video on the AIDS crisis, which is a subject that that's been very important to me, that I've cared a lot about, and I live in a really great place to talk to people who experienced the AIDS crisis firsthand. And so that's where I'm going. I hope you guys like this idea. Hope you're okay with this plan. I definitely would like to hear what you guys think in the chat. I am following along. But yeah, I think that it's a good decision. At least it's a good thing to experiment with. We'll see where it goes, right? So I'm hoping that I'm going to. Can you start making videos outside or make more content high quality? Okay. Yeah, I'm going the ContraPoints route. That's the plan. I want to make my video. I want to make the step back main videos to be more like a ContraPoints video, or say a Peter Coffin very important documentary, or something like that. Because I do want to make these videos and make them more of an event, which means that when they come out, I'm going to try not only to get them out to everybody, but I'm going to try to like pitch them at blogs, try to pitch media, things like that. But it does mean that you're not going to be getting like step back, the like kind of, panic step back videos that I do every week. But you will get quick steps. So quick steps won't go anywhere. They will still be around. The other thing it will do too is it will help me be a little bit more flexible in my life. I always, for anybody who's watched Lost, I always have this sense that like every week is like when the people on Lost, when all the people were stuck in this room with this button and a countdown timer, and as every time they push the button, the countdown timer would restart. And so I think I'm going to trying to like get myself out of that loop, because it's hurting the quality of the videos, in my opinion. Like more input into videos. So yeah, when it comes to my scripts and stuff, I'm going to try and get some people to review my scripts before they're finished. I'm going to feature like blips and interviews and pieces from either other YouTubers or from historians who are experts in this field of some kind. That's the plan. And yeah, and also it means that I don't have to, if it's Wednesday night, stay up until like 3 a.m. making sure that a video is done. And I can practice a little bit more self-care. Because I'll be honest, Step Back is great and I love doing it, but it also is a little bit destroying my life in the sense of like the constant weekly grind. Like it is it is a lot of hours, and so I would really like to use those hours towards something I'm a little bit more proud of. I think you guys seem to understand. So, thank you so much for sitting through this this long session of me talking about what I want to do. But you guys, you're watching this stream, so I imagine that this is like you guys are people who are really invested in this channel, and you're invested in the content that comes out, and I want it to be something that that would work. Like I feel like you guys want to. I think you guys will enjoy it. All right. So that's the serious stuff aside. Let's I'm going to take I think you guys have a couple questions, and then we'll see where it goes. So, Miss Dan Angel, did you receive your weed yet? No. That hasn't arrived yet. I actually haven't even gotten the notification that it's shipped yet, because apparently, ever since legalization day happened, all of the marijuana stores across the country grossly underestimated how much weed they were going to need. They something like, I think I saw the study that said that $600 million worth of marijuana has been purchased in the last like 5 days. So yeah, $600 million worth of marijuana was bought, and almost every province is out of stock on most things. And so they definitely are struggling to sort of meet demand. I was one of the first people in the province to order cannabis, and I don't know when it's going to show up. I anticipate it'll come either tomorrow or Thursday, but I haven't even gotten. They're supposed to send you an email to tell you that that it's shipped, and it hasn't even told me that yet. Although I live in Toronto, so I imagine that when it ships, it'll probably show up only in about a day or two. All right. Let's see. Christian Vibrecht. Did you hear about the attempted bombing of Soros? No, I haven't heard about or Soros or Soros. That's it, Soros, because it's Hungarian, right? No, I haven't heard about it. This is the first I have heard. Will you smoke weed on camera and become cool, a cool meme like Rocket Man? I don't know. I don't want to have cannabis so associated with my brand that I can't go into the United States. That's something I worry about a little bit, but I doubt I'll ever get that famous, so don't worry about it. 255 AD, cats or dogs? I say this all the time, that I am a dog person that was raised in a house that only had cats. Right now I have a house that only has cats because my wife had a cat when we moved in together. And I really want a dog. I want one so bad. It hurts how bad I want a dog. I love going to my in-laws every Christmas because they have like 5 dogs, and I love those dogs. And so the second that we have the space for it, I'm getting one. I am so excited because I never had a dog as a kid, even though I really like them. I had a dog for a few years in my late teens, early 20s. Like around 2008, we got a dog, and I had that dog for about 2 years before I had to move. And man, it was so great, and I can't wait to actually get like a real dog. Unfortunately, I have 2 cats, and Kelly, my wife, doesn't really like animals that much. So we have a rule where we can't really have more than 2 pets. And so really it's going to be the first pet I get when one of the cats passes away, which, is a thing. Can you make reviews on countries and teach us about the traditions and history of those countries and their culture? Those are great ideas for videos. I've done a few of those. I did one on Ethiopia and I did one on Sudan. So you should check out those ones. But and Germany. I did a little bit on Germany. So you should probably check out those ones. Maybe I'll do some more. Big dogs or small dogs? I like medium-sized dogs. Like, I don't really want like a giant golden retriever or like a tiny little the dog that I had when I had one for a couple years was a Jack Russell Terrier, and I would like one a little bit bigger than that. Are there any alt history scenarios you would like to expand into a full video? Not really. I think that alternate history scenarios are more of a fun exercise to do with friends or as like a teaching thing, but I don't think that they would make very good step back videos. I think that step back is very much not conducive to alternate history stuff. I feel like that would taint the channel a little bit. Any favorite breed? I'd probably rescue a mutt, to be honest, but like Moonshot, I love the goofy dogs, like a pug or like a Boston Terrier. I love those, like those weird looking dogs. Do you think marijuana being legalized will have effects on the people incarcerated for it who are still in prison? Yes, to an extent. Ottawa has already promised that anybody who has been charged with possession of 30 grams of cannabis or less is going to get a pardon. And on top of that, police are definitely going to like I think that if anybody goes for like a parole hearing or something like that, pointing out that one of the charges they had was for cannabis possession after cannabis is no longer illegal will probably help with that to some extent. I do think that you'll also see a positive benefit in the police no longer being able to over-police communities of color, which would be nice. 255 AD. Would substance abuse be a problem in a communist world? Yes. Addiction is a disorder that anybody can get. As long as you have lots of things can be turned into can be addictive. I would say that there would be fewer things that would cause actual cause. I feel like addiction would go way down. Substance abuse is usually a side effect of poverty. It's a side effect of struggling under capitalism and mental illness, which we'd only be getting rid of one of those, and so there would probably be a lot fewer cases, but hopefully there would be. If there is somebody who is struggling with substance abuse, they would be able to get help. That's the main thing between a communist and a capitalist society, is that a communist society values things for being a benefit to society, while capitalism values things that make money. And mental health care doesn't make money, so it's not valued. And if we can get to a future in which we have a communist economy, then mental health care would be vastly improved. And I think that if I don't know if this is necessarily a communist thing, but if we just lived in a better world based on principles of empathy, that we would treat substance abuse as a medical problem rather than a criminal problem. But yeah. Also, as Radical Reviewer, what breed of dog is you? I know that because the character is a dog. It looks like it's a mutt, but a cute one. Jacob Rodriguez, did the Tamil Nadu meme die already? Oh yeah. It lasted about 45 minutes after the stream went down. And basically, if you remember last week when I did my stream, the YouTube crashed. Like, YouTube went down for several hours. Tamil Nadu lasted as long as that outage. By the time YouTube came back, Tamil Nadu was dead. Although, you know how memes are. They die, but they're always waiting to come back. But it did result in a whole bunch of pretty funny Photoshop memes in the Discord, in the Step Back Discord, that I will cherish until the day I die. You're going to come out with a video on prison abolition in a couple days? Good. Okay. So let's look at some of these. I think my favorite meme that came out of Tamil Nadu was made by Hor, and it was a fake Discord DM from Tamil Nadu that just says "do me," and I think it was hilarious because I was just like, yeah, that's good, very very good. That one made me smile. That was my favorite. We have some, what's it called? I don't get Gen Z stuff, and so there's some weird shit that gets posted in the meme thread that I have no idea what's going on anymore. All right. So let's talk about some of Tamil Nadu. So let's talk about some alternate history scenarios. I've got a few here. We can see what's up. I think maybe we, since there's so many of them and you guys all have different ones, that we'll try to we'll do them a little bit quicker than in the past. Because I think like last time we did one for like almost an hour, and I don't think that's fair to everybody else who had pitched them. So first one comes from Argos Panoptis. Let me just get myself some water. I got water on my shirt. Lovely. What if the Crusades were just a series of pilgrimages? Okay. First of all, the whole thing about I actually wanted if there was ever a time where I wanted to make a Doctor Who episode, like first of all, I mean, this is kind of a segue, but the Doctor Who episode that came out on Sunday, so good. So good. They on Doctor Who this week they did Rosa Parks. They did an episode about Rosa Parks and it was so good. Oh my god, I loved it. Anyways, you have an alternate history. I have an alternate history a Discord friend is working on. It's called The People's Socialist Atlas, a Nat Geo style book she wants to get published. Well, good luck to her. Yeah, good luck. That's a cool idea, like a National Geographic for an alternate universe. That's kind of neat. All right, so the Crusades. So for anyone who doesn't know, the Crusades were a series of wars by the Christian world to attack the Islamic world in order to quote-unquote retake the capital of Jerusalem, the holiest site for Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. The Doctor Who episode I want to write is where the Doctor goes to Jerusalem shortly after the First Crusade, with the whole, because there's this whole rumor that the Knights Templar had access to the Holy Grail. And what I would have liked to make is an episode where the Doctor finds another TARDIS, that its chameleon circuit, which is the thing that it uses to disguise itself, is it's disguised itself as the Holy Grail, or sorry, not the Ark of the Covenant. That's what I meant. And some enterprising Knight Templar is trying to use it to do something nefarious, like, and I wanted the monster to be like a human from that period. I thought that would be kind of clever. Anyways, I'm sure for anybody who doesn't watch Doctor Who, this is super interesting. So let's just move along. So the Crusades, series of wars. There were 4 of them. And also, Michael Kirshner, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it a lot. Super chats really help with making Step Back a regular thing and making this stream easier to do and building this into something that I can dedicate more time to. So thank you very much, Michael. Anyways, there is a so in this alternate scenario, if I recall correctly, there was an idea even that the original papal bull was actually not a call to invade the Holy Land, but was a call to make it safe for pilgrims to get to the Holy Land. Because basically, one of the things that people were complaining about was that pilgrims who were going to Jerusalem were getting killed along the way, either by highwaymen or they were getting taxed into oblivion by the caliphate. And I'd be interested to know. So, let's just say, I don't know, there's too much shit going on in Europe and the other, maybe people took their religion a little bit less seriously than in our timeline. And the Crusades never catch on. Or at least maybe they just don't happen. And because the first one's not a success, maybe the second, third, and fourth just don't happen. It just doesn't become a thing. Oh, there are 12 Crusades. Jeez. So what happens in that case? Well, I think that a few things happen. One, Europe definitely develops a lot slower. A lot of the advantages that Europe got, technology-wise, philosophy-wise, things like that, came from ideas they brought back with them from Jerusalem. And so without the Crusader kings and things like that, you have much less communication between the Islamic world and the modern or the Islamic world and the European world. I think in that case, one of the biggest things it means is that Europe doesn't do very well. Europe probably doesn't develop very fast because a lot of the things that were needed to have the scientific development and take all of the things from the Arab Enlightenment seriously would have required contact with the Islamic world. It would have still come at one point, but it would have been much later, and it would have been probably when the Turks overthrew Constantinople and in 1493, which would mean that a lot of the mathematics, the technology, things like that, would have come to Europe a lot later. I think what that also means is that the Islamic world, the Caliph, not Suleiman, Al-Rashid, I think, was the Sultan during the First Crusade. And Sultan Al-Rashid would probably... Was it Al-Rashid? Because Suleiman was an Ottoman Sultan. Either way, Harun al-Rashid, I think, was his name. And he would, like, that... The fighting against the Crusaders changed the Islamic world quite a bit, too. They started a holy war, a jihad against the West. And that led to, the conquest back of Jerusalem and the sort of back and forth that would happen. If that was the case, if they didn't have to worry about that, they would probably, first of all, they would probably contact each other less. But if there was contact, Europe and the Middle East would probably have a much more amicable relationship, especially if the Middle East was not, if the caliphs were not interfering with not interfering with Christian pilgrims. So you might have seen less violence break out. That sort of, because like this is one of the things I always say about why I'm a pacifist, which is like you have that initial act of violence, which promotes a retaliation, which promotes a retaliation to the retaliation, which promotes a retaliation to retaliation. You do that enough times, nobody gives a shit what anyone's fighting about anymore. It's just about personal vendettas and trying to win whatever the conflict is. And so people born on one side don't care about what positions you have or what rights you have to anything. They just care about defeating you. Because, their uncle and their father and their brother all died fighting you. And the same thing is happening on the other side. And this is why violence, even though it feels so good and it feels like it's the right thing to do, is not a tangible solution for a long-term problem. Anyways, so say we, turn down the heat of the violence between East and West. A whole lot changes. First of all, you end up with less impetus to go west. If you guys remember correctly, that one of the factors that led to Columbus getting the money to go west and discover the New World came from a need to find a new route to the east because the Ottoman emperor was slapping on so much taxes from things coming through the Silk Road. If there's less animosity between the two worlds, maybe that's less of a factor. Because the Middle East would still get destroyed in the 13th century by the Mongols. Like, that's still a thing that would happen. Maybe they would have a bit more resources because they haven't been fighting crusades in order to fight off the Mongols. So you could even say that the Mongols get... You know what? In my scenario, let's go for it. I don't have to be super cautious. This is alternate history, not real history. You could say that, the Mongols actually get defeated by the Arabs, and Baghdad never falls. And so what you'd very much have, and if it wasn't for the Mongols, I think would very much be in line for how history would turn out, is that the Islamic Golden Age lasts a lot longer, and that the Muslim world becomes way more powerful than Europe. Because if you think about it, Islam as a religion and Muslim culture in the Middle Ages feels way more ready to become the the colonial emperors of the earth. If you think about it, first of all, technology wise, until the 13th century, when the Mongols basically destroyed the Islamic world, the Muslim world was technologically and scientifically and philosophically far in advance of the rest of the world. Like maybe China was close with them, but as far as Western Asia and Europe, they were there's no contest. And without the destruction by the Mongols, they would probably have continued that at least for a while. Second of all, Islam itself is very different from Christianity in this sense of when it comes to understanding others, when it comes to multi-ethnic empires, when it comes to all these sorts of things. Islam is a religion that is much more presupposed. It's not so much interested in proselytizing and getting new people to the faith. So it's not really interested in converting all that much. But and it has a lot of laws in place that are way easier for having people who are not part of the religion as part of the empire. You saw this with things like the jizya, which was like a tax that was placed on non-Abrahamic people who lived underneath an Islamic ruler. You had it. There's all sorts of things. It was easier to be a non-Muslim living in the Islamic world than it was to be a non-Christian living in the Christian world, if that makes sense. And so so we have the technological advancement, we have the predisposition. Also, on top of that, Islam is a very scholarly religion. It is a religion that is entirely focused on study and interpretation and philosophy, which means that it has a lot more to develop theologically in order to adapt to being more centered in the world. Which means that, unlike Christianity, which, Christians literally would burn the, Plato was burned, and, Socrates was burned, and, all of, the ancient texts and all of the philosophy and the math that was developed in ancient Greece and ancient Rome was destroyed. Because in the Christian world, it was considered heretical knowledge. It was made by heathens, so it needed to be destroyed. I think the only really big survivor was Galen, who wrote the medical textbook that the Christians used for 1,000 years. And also, Christian theology is based on this idea that the world is constantly getting worse and that we are just on the path to revelation. And so the Islamic world was way more focused on study and philosophy. Like a lot of the ancient Greek texts that we know of today, like the things that survived from ancient Greece, were translated from Arabic because the Arabs kept all those things. So I do think that if we have no crusades and the Islamic world is able to fend off the Mongols, then the Islamic world, I think various caliphs, because I think that the breakup of the Islamic world over various things, the Islamic Caliphate was too big to stay as one unit for a long time. I'm very much not a believer in space-filling empires. And I do think that you could probably see various kingdoms come up, but maybe with a caliph that still stays in power as sort of the religious head, sort of like a pope. And they get some of the same technology. I mean, Arabs got the guns before the Europeans did. Arabs got the compass before the Europeans did. So they would have all the technology that they would need to get involved with things like exploration and colonization. So maybe without that destruction, you would see, coming into like the 15th and 16th century, you'd see more long voyages and exploration done by the Arabs, which would probably mean that not only would, let's say, like Moroccan explorers arrive in the Americas way before the Europeans do, but you'd probably start seeing at least colonization and greater globalized trade with China and India, as people from the Arabian Peninsula, the easiest place, like I think that their more obvious route to explore would be to go down the eastern coast of Africa and also to explore the Indian Ocean. So you might see a situation where you see more exploration and more colonization happening in like India and Southeast Asia and maybe like Australia and Oceania. And like that's where a lot more Muslims would show up. And as you know, that like a lot of those countries do have very high Muslim populations because this did happen to some extent, but let's say even more so. And so maybe before any people from the old world make it to the Americas, because, that makes more sense if you're an explorer from Spain to go to the Americas. But if you're an explorer from Saudi Arabia, or like modern day Saudi Arabia, you'd probably more likely end up in like, in the long term, you might end up in Australia before you end up in America, which would be very interesting to see. So maybe the Americas are like settled way later, like maybe in like the 16th or 17th century, because the Americas are really only discovered by Arab explorers, maybe like later on, like maybe after they've explored once they start exploring the Pacific, and it starts going like from like the West Coast eastward. I don't know. On top of that, they would probably there would be some form of colonization of Europe. I think that without the Taifa kingdoms in Spain would probably have greater resources, because after the First Crusade, there was a lot of divisions that happened. So you probably would have seen more backlash against the Reconquista that happened in the Iberian Peninsula, and maybe you would have more conversion of Christian Europe to Islam. Because I think at that point, like places like Sardinia and Silesia and like places like Sardinia and like Malta and Sicily had Muslim presence. And maybe if the Islamic world was stronger and more united, that they would have, and they were technologically advanced, they would probably be much more of a threat to Christian domination of Europe. And maybe it would end up like most of my Crusader Kings 2 games, where the caliphs of the Middle East end up basically slowly converting and conquering and ruling over Europe. And in that case, I would think that you would probably see, without like, because the Islamic world never had the Dark Ages. So maybe you wouldn't have those like technological setbacks, and who knows, maybe we'd be like a couple hundred years ahead in technological progress today, because the conquests of the Mongols also affected the Islamic world, and so did European colonization. Things like Wahhabism, the school of the Islamic school that's behind things like the Saudi Arabian, like this sort of fundamentalist, let's go back to 7th century thinking school of Islam, was started in the 17th century by an anti-Western scholar. If there isn't really a West, or if the West really, like if you think if the Middle East is basically the West, then that wouldn't happen. And there, in that 17th century movement was also a greater, more conservative movement to stop being obsessed with scholarship and being more mystical and being less scholarly, which started to take root in the Islamic world after the conquest of the Mongols. And so you'd actually probably, maybe without the Crusades and without the Mongol conquest, you see an Islamic world that is much more focused on the things that make it successful. Scholastic success, philosophy, things like that. That is a world where... That is a very strange world. It is a world where a lot of people are... A lot more Muslims in the world. I imagine that you'd probably have a lot more different schools of Islam, and you'd probably have a lot more theological development. Like, I imagine that even if the Catholic world, the Christian world became converted to Islam over time, that they would probably have, kind of like how Shia and Sunni Islam exist, there would probably be like a school of Islam or a section of Islam that would be very much European, a European concept of Islam, maybe one that's a lot more like Christianity. So one that's a lot more dogmatic and a lot more about spreading the faith and things like that. I don't know. I mean, it's not implausible. In our timeline, a obscure religion from the Middle East took over Europe, so why not? Why couldn't it happen twice? And so yeah, you could probably see that this would be a world that very quickly would become centered around like Mecca and Medina and things like that. Be a very interesting world. Probably technologically advanced to ourselves. No booze. Alcohol would be completely banned. Cannabis might be legal. Depends. The Muslim world went back and forth on that quite a bit. That'd be interesting to see. There'd be a lot of interesting things to see there. Makes me want to do like a mega campaign as an Islamic ruler in the Middle East. If I could get myself good at Crusader Kings 2, maybe I would play that for you guys. I imagine that you guys would probably find that fun. Can you ever make a video about if the Nazis won World War II? Everyone's done that. And also, I'm not an alternate history channel. I'm an actual history channel. The Nazis didn't win World War II. Why would I make a video about that? It just doesn't feel like a step back video. I don't know. Like, what would, like, a step back alternate history series, like, what would be the point? I feel like, I don't know, like, it just doesn't feel like it's a fun thing for us to do here, but I don't understand what, like, I think it would go so far against what step back is about that I don't think it would work. It'd be fun to do something like this. I like doing this. We could probably do this once a month or so, and I would have no problem with that. But that's up to you guys. I'll let... Yeah, someone's mistaking me for the alternate history hub. Would that be interesting? I should pitch this at Cody, is I should try and write and make an alternate history hub channel and just be like, hey, Cody, do you want this for your channel? Do you want free content? I'll make you a free video. That would be interesting to see. I wonder if he'd take me up on that. Yeah, let's go to the next scenario. So I already predicted the Islamic takeover of the entire world, so that's fun. I especially like the idea of like Cuba being owned by Morocco, because I think I played... Oh, wait, no. That was the first EU4 game that I ever played, and really the only one that I ever played like all the way until the end of the time. I played as the Ottoman Empire, and one of the things I did was I conquered Morocco, or I like did a no CB war on Morocco to take a province on their west coast, and then I started taking over South America and Central America, and I basically became like the #1 colonial power in the Americas as the Ottoman Empire. And it was so much fun to see like this, like Cuba, who was being run by like a population of Turkish Sunni Muslims, and it was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting Cuba. That was fun. What if the USSR invented the internet first? Well, friend, make a second channel called Step Forward Not History, where you do alt history. That would be funny. Anyways, let's talk about the USSR and the internet. This one I feel like I can talk. So, okay, Paradox Game Stream. Should I do a Paradox Game Stream? That would be fun. I'd have to get good at one of them. I play Stellaris a little bit, but I feel like that's like the least step backy of all of the games. But maybe I think that there's a lot of rumors going around that the Crusader Kings 2 expansion that came out recently is going to be the last one. So maybe I should finally like figure out how to play that game now that it's like finished, you know. We'll see where it goes. But I can put that on the list. I'll write it down. I have a little list of like ideas that I'm going to circle through, and alternate history night is one of them. But just like Assassin's Creed and watching old videos. So let's just add CK2 on there, or Paradox Night. That'd be fun. Oh, there's already a new DLC announced? Well, that's good. Oh, I thought, like, Holy Fury... The rumor that I was saying is that Holy Fury is going to be the last DLC. Because if you look at, like, the features of Holy Fury, it looks like they are basically fleshing out, like, the last little bits of the game that don't really have a lot of modernization, and that when it's done, like, there's really not a lot of places to go with Crusader Kings 2 after Holy Fury. And so a lot of people are thinking that, like, that might be the last expansion, and that Crusader Kings 2 will just be finished, which is fine because it is already a fantastically well-made game, and it is very complex at this point. So I think it's good in the state it's in. But who knows? They could always think of more. Crusader Kings 2 is still like a powerhouse for the Paradox people. But if they stop making expansions for Crusader Kings 2, it means they could maybe, think about doing Crusader Kings 3, which would be I'd like to see. That'd be cool. Hoi 4. Oh my god. Hearts of Iron 4. I think out of all of the Paradox games, I like Hearts of Iron 4 the least. I don't understand it. It's one of the, Paradox games in general, you're very confused at the beginning, but I have no idea what to do in a Hearts of Iron 4. I get so lost and confused, and I don't even know what I want to do, and I don't understand the front system. I don't understand what soldiers or technologies I should be making. I know literally nothing about it, and it always just gets me really confused. I would definitely like to see a Chinese version of Crusader Kings. That would be super fun. Oh yeah, and they are making a Golden Pelt. They already have a game that they're in development called Imperator Rome. That is going to be a game that's going to be. It's basically like, it's apparently a lot like Europa Universalis, but it's going to be about Rome, which will be fun. Are you a fan of the Assassin's Creed game series? I don't know. I haven't played it very much. You guys saw me playing it a couple weeks ago, and I'll probably play it next week. Now that I've got this. Hey guys, look, it came. So next week we'll play some Assassin's Creed, and I'll actually use this. That'll be fun. And yeah, it'd be good to have sometimes to do a strategy game and sometimes to do an action game. That could be good. Have you played Battlefield 5? I have never played a Battlefield game in my life. Never. Is that an Amazon Basics controller? Yes, it is. Because I have an Amazon Basics level of income. Yeah, maybe when I finish Assassin's Creed, we can play Dark Souls. That'll be fun. Hey, Eric the Viking. All right. For me, the games, the tier list of Paradox games is Stellaris, Crusader Kings, Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron. That's my list. You should do a game with subs or Patreons. I haven't really played a lot of multiplayer Paradox games. Are they any fun? Oh, Victoria 2. Victoria 2 is pretty good. I think that... I forgot about Victoria 2. I have played Victoria 2. I played a Victoria 2 game where I played as... I made Quebec independent and became a world power by 1936, which made me very happy. I called it like Jean-Guy l'Empire. I made like a whole picture list of it. It was really fun. Yeah, I'd probably put... All right, Stellaris... All right, Stellaris is at the top. Stellaris is by far my favorite Paradox game. Second is Crusader Kings 2. Third is going to be is probably going to be Europa Universalis, and then we'll go with Vicky 2, and then at the bottom I'd put Hearts of Iron. I just don't get it. I don't get Hearts of Iron, and I also like... I don't know if you followed my channel long enough, you'll know that I really am just tired and do not particularly care about World War II. I think that it is one of the most overdone things in history. And if you notice, I like make no videos about World War II, and it's because I just have no interest. You just got a college to agree to consult with you on an alternate history book. He's a South American history professor. Good job, Eric. I really want Victoria 3 too. I think that Victoria 3 with the new engines, Victoria 3 with the new engine would be really good. I love the Victorian age is such a cool time too, that I would love to see. I'd love to see them with a more modern approach take on the Victorian age, because like industrialization, railroad lines, mobilization, military-wise, you have the advancement of like industrialized warfare. So like at the beginning of the game in 1836, you're barely like off Napoleon, doing like having like people in brightly colored uniforms with big feathery helmets and guns like go through that. You get like the American Civil War, and by the end you're doing like the First World War, and you're like in a complete like dig in like bloodbath at the end. And I think that if they can make that reflect in the mechanics, I think it would make the game so good, because you can just watch. Like one of the best things about Victoria 2 is that as the game progresses, you can see the world speeding up, and I think that's really cool. The only reason why I like EU4 and I understand EU4 is because I watched a shit ton of DDR Jake videos, and so I have a much easier time understanding what the mechanics are in Hearts of Iron 4. It's still not a game I like particularly well, but it's alright. I should probably try playing it again, honestly. Paradox Grants, okay. Oh, you're a colleague, okay. If I made a video about Jack the Ripper, ooh, that would be fun. Jack the Ripper, maybe my Halloween video has already been made, but maybe next year. Jack the Ripper would be a very good Halloween video. All right. So let's talk about the USSR and the internet. So let's see. So first of all, let's talk about the internet. The internet has been, the internet came out of a program, so something called Command and Control. So what Command and Control is it's a idea within the U.S. military that started propping up after, actually it happened during World War II. They started building these ships, and these naval ships. And they were finding more and more sophisticated means to do fire control, which means like being able to time the guns and being able to aim the guns so that they can hit targets further and further away. And they started developing more and more sophisticated fire control methods on these things. And then after the war, they also had a nuclear arsenal to worry about. But the main thing is that after the Second World War, the U.S. military was just humongous, and they needed to find a way to make it all work, because a lot of the issues that the United States had during World War II were due to lack of communication. And so after World War II, they had like an assessment of how they performed in World War II, and they said, we really need to find ways for our military infrastructure to function more efficiently. We need to have the Navy and the Army and the Air Force all talking to each other more regularly, because when we fuck that up, that's when we had our major defeats. Especially like, for example, Pearl Harbor. They had there's a lot of conspiracy theories about this, kind of like the conspiracy theories about 9/11, if you think about it, where they had intelligence about the attack on Pearl Harbor that they could have acted on, but there was such a lack of communication between the different divisions of the military, and there was issues with the radar, or with the radio communication network that was going on, that they were completely unable to prepare in time for the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And so they started developing new and more sophisticated ways to have called command and control, which was going to be a way to make the military an integrated unit using technology. And they started this program at MIT where they were going to pay a shit ton of money to computer scientists who, with the Enigma code and all sorts of other stuff, computer science was showing to be, the next big thing. And so they invested a shit ton of money in these, and it got really, really successful. And that eventually is what spilt over into the ARPANET, which was a way to interconnect all of the military bases in the United States that would work in that would have this sort of rerouting function, so that if, say, a city was eliminated off the map because it was the Cold War, so in case there was like a nuclear bomb that went off that knocked out part of the network, that the network would automatically be able to reconnect through different routes and be able to reestablish communications. That was the idea behind it. So that protocol eventually developed into what's called the TCP/IP protocol, which is the thing that makes the internet function. Without the TCP/IP protocol, you don't have the internet. And it stayed in military circles, but also stayed in research circles until the late 80s, when they decided to move it into the private sector. And the private sector developed it into what we call today the World Wide Web, which started to come online in the early 90s. And so, what if the Soviet Union decided... So, let's say World War II happens, and World War II ends. And let's just say we have, we swap strategies. The Soviet Union strategy after World War II was rebuild the entire country, because it kind of all got destroyed. After that's done, the focus was on trying to very quickly build a nuclear arsenal that could rival the United States. They never came close, but that was we need enough stuff, and we need to go to space, and we need to do all this. So what if the Soviet Union went, all right, we need to focus on computer science and that kinds of things? Because really, if you think about the way the Soviets approached their scientific problems, is that they would typically they saw them as engineering problems and not as science problems. That's the big difference between the US and the USSR, is that the US tended to hire computer scientists and physicists, and the USSR tended to train engineers. Hence why the Soviet rocket, the Soyuz, hasn't really it's essentially the same rocket they had developed in the 1950s. It's just been iterated upon over and over again, because when scientists design rockets, they completely start over from scratch every single time, while the engineers just are constantly iterating over and over and over again. So we need to have a long talk about the history of the internet. I can totally do that. This is my PhD research. Part of my comprehensive exams, I read a lot, and I have studied a lot about the history of computers and the history of the internet and the history of communication networks. So this is like my jam. This is like where I am. I know a shit ton about this. My supervisor was a communications historian who studied the telephone. So like this is my thing. Anyways. So let's say the Soviet Union decides that after World War II that they need to increase their communication somehow. And that the United States thinks that the problem that they have is that, I don't know, the U.S. just doesn't, I don't know, the U.S. just doesn't think that they need to communicate. I don't know. Some of that history just seems interesting. It is interesting. It's fascinating history. The internet came out of like a need to make a more robust communication network for the military. It's pretty standard. It's pretty cool. Anyways, we're talking about the USSR getting the internet. So USSR gets the internet. I imagine, so there's a few things that would make this very difficult, and that is that the internet was developed as a very open source, very like not controlled technology. And the first thing that I think is that the Soviet Union, with its attempts to control the movement of information. Like, if you think about it, this is the Soviet Union was running radar jammers or radio jammers in order to block Western radio stations from getting into the USSR. And we're doing stuff like, you guys know that really old meme video from like 10 years ago of the guy going, yo, 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 yo. The reason he did that is because in the 1960s, that was a song about being a cowboy, and while they wanted to have the song on television, the Soviet government said, we do not want lyrics that pertain to anything positive associated with the United States being allowed on television. And so I can imagine you would not see an internet in the way that we think of it, with like web pages and things like that. The free market didn't invent the internet. The internet was invented by computer scientists at MIT with shit tons of money from the Pentagon. But yes, all right. So like cyber sin is a good thing to talk about. So let's say the USSR, when they get a hold of internet technology, they think to use it like cyber sin. Now, cyber sin was a thing that happened during the Chilean government under Salvador Allende. And cyber sin was this idea to make a planned economy that functions by having all of the aspects of the Chilean economy all in networked communication with each other. So at any time you could go into this room literally modeled after Star Trek, and you could know, like, this factory is producing this much paper at this time, and they have this much, and this is going on this truck, and it's going here. And like the entire economy was going to be, it never got finished, but it was going to be mapped out and going to places, and you would be able to control and tweak the dials of the economy just by using this information network. That was the idea behind it. Unfortunately, the collapse of the Allende government and the rise of Augusto Pinochet and the fascist government that came afterwards basically ruined the CyberSyn project. But it does sound like if we're going to have the Soviets invent the internet before the US, I think that something like CyberSyn would actually make a lot of sense to be something that they would put in place, more than, say, an actual communication network, because the Soviets didn't really want people talking to each other. They didn't really, they would not like something like the internet because the Soviets were very much obsessed with controlling methods of communication. they didn't want people being able to. They wouldn't want YouTube. Like if the USSR existed today, they would be one of the countries that have YouTube blocked. They would probably have a Great Wall of Russia, just like the one they have in China. Then they'd probably have their own internet, called like the People's Network or something like that, and it would probably be terrible. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that they implement a CyberSyn system. That would be huge and Byzantine and complex. Okay. So the USSR's planned economy all of a sudden becomes super efficient and way more reactive than it used to be. Because one of the issues of the USSR is that it was very conservative and very obsessed with like people having different economic domains and things like that. And so very often, in order to hit like production targets and things like that, the Soviet Union would overproduce things they need, and they wouldn't produce things that they don't, or they would overproduce things they don't need, and then they would underproduce things that they need. And so having a CyberSyn system to network all of this stuff would make that a lot more reactive and able to function, which would mean that the Soviet economy would probably be a lot more functional. However, the Soviet economy is still, because of their access to raw resources, would be way behind the United States. Like, this is one of the things they don't tell you about the Cold War, is that it was never really an equal conflict at all. It was very much theater, because the United States was never in a position where it could, where it was like legitimately afraid of the Soviet Union's military capacity. There was no chance the Soviet Union was going to win. It was an aggressive attempt to choke the USSR out of existence. Does that make sense? And so the Soviets would probably have... Oh, I think someone's home. I see seltzer bottles, guys. Hello.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Grapefruit or lime?
Lime. Probably shouldn't show the label.
Sponsored by Perrier.
No.
Not sponsored by Perrier.
All right. So let's continue, shall we? Now that I have liquid. So there are still a lot of problems that would have shown up in the USSR. Like the reason why the USSR collapsed has to do with continued pressure from the United States, which I think like resulted in the USSR spending a huge amount of its industrial capacity producing the Red Army. Because basically, in order to... She's American, Christian. In order to produce the things that the USSR needed to compete against the United States in the Cold War, it had to spend a huge amount of its resource making military assets. Like way higher percentage than the United States. And so the Soviet Union was always kind of messed up in that sense, because they were super overinvested in the military, and then they didn't have enough for the day-to-day needs, because if they backed down on their military whatsoever, they could just be overwhelmed and deal with that. And on top of that, they had a lot more riots and protests, and the Soviet answer to that was to violently put it down with soldiers. So they were basically they needed the big military in order to suppress their own people. Soviet Union was not a good country, guys. Anyways, given the internet, I imagine one of the other things that they would apply it to would be trying to logistically control their military and control and suppress dissent, which could mean that you would actually see a more functional Soviet Union, because it was very clunky and all these kinds of things. Does that prevent the Soviet Union's collapse? I don't know. That's a tough question. The Soviet Union collapsed because of nationalist movements that began to spring up in the 1980s that had to do with grievances that had been around. Good night, Night Watcher. So, like, the Soviet Union broke up because of long-term grievances that had been around ever since the Soviets violently conquered all of the countries that were now under their umbrella. So that eventually, like, starting with Poland, that kind of led to everything breaking away. So I'm not sure if that really stops the Soviet Union. Because the Soviet Union did have the internet, actually, to an extent. When the UN had its declaration about what was and was not going to be a like internet domain, you can actually still get .su top level domains, for example, that come from the Soviet Union, which collapsed like later that year. So, lucky us. And so I would think that, honestly, the issues with the Soviet Union, they were economic to an extent, and I would say that it probably would have extended the life of the Soviet Union maybe a little bit, but for the most part, it was the long-term effects of the violent conquest of all of these places, and the fact that there was a country born of revolution, revolutions result in the most megalomaniacal and violent rising to the top, and so, the fact that it was a country that was extremely authoritarian, with a very kludgy and slow process of politics, with tons of court intrigue and boss pleasing that led to a country that was, by the 1970s especially, very conservative, afraid to try new things, very stale, very unresponsive to important problems, and honestly, like a house of cards that was ready to collapse at any minute. And I don't see like having a better organized, planned economy fixing that fundamental problem, which I think came out of the fact that as Eastern Europe's population stagnates and declines, how will those countries change as a result? Well, you're already watching. They're becoming Nazis. You'd think that, like, Poland's turning into, like, a Nazi state right now, and you'd think that Poland, of all countries, would be like, hey, let's not do the Nazi thing. But, Poland, you ruin everything good. I hope you're being sarcastic because, like, people don't give enough attention to, like, the horrible shit the Soviet Union did to Poland. Whenever I talk to tankies, I always want to talk about, like, hey, if you're so, like, because, like, tankies will often be like, oh, Stalin was, like, just, like, he did whatever it took to fight fascism, and it was like, really, can you explain to me how Stalin fought fascism by making an agreement with Hitler to split up Poland and then invaded Poland? Or what part of fighting fascism involved the pre-World War II invasion of Finland being a giant disaster as well? I don't know. Enlighten me. Not to mention killing millions of Ukrainians, which tankies will say that both didn't happen, but also if it did happen, it would have been a good thing. Which is like the typical tanky response to, like, the Holodomor. But yeah, I think that there are a lot of Soviet apologists who really need to talk to literally anybody from Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Belarus, any of or Ukraine, any of those countries that have quite a close relationship with the Soviet Union that they would really like to forget. And they have the Soviet Union, by just violently conquering and oppressing these people, put such a bad taste for communism in these people's mouths that now they're turning into Nazis. Like, good job, Soviet Union. You did a really good job for the leftist cause there. Sorry, it's turned into like an anti-tanky rant. All right, was there a question? Can people who haven't been to university be woke? Yeah, sure. If anything, it's easier to do that than ever. I did said in a stream earlier today that education is super important for being able to explore not only like things that you are interested in, but also to have firsthand experiences with different types of people and get to know other types of people. And I guess 255 AD wants me to like, respond to that and say like, oh, can only people who go to school be woke? And it's like, no. There are people who, it's just an easy way to do it. It's an easy way for people, because like if you do like, just go to high school and then get a job, it's really hard for you to, have that sort of cosmopolitan life. It's hard for you to get a lot of experience with new people because, let's be honest, when you're doing your undergrad, you have a shit ton of free time, more so than you'll ever have as like a person doing shift work, especially, with the kind of work you'd get after finishing high school or just finishing high school. Like, you are going to have way more time in your early 20s to just hang out with people and talk about stuff. And you never experience that again. And if you go right to work after high school, you're never going to experience it. You're going to be in the same town that you were born in, talking to your same friends from high school and not developing. But that's not like, that's just a tendency. It's not like destination. There are tons of people who just went to high school but also had a lot of interests. And so they move, they develop, they do things. It's just that just going to post-secondary school makes it a lot easier. You'll have free time if you're not working to pay for school. Yeah, that's true. Very few people who can actually like make enough money to pay for school while going to school. It's so expensive that it would be pretty hard to do so. Whew. Yeah. Sorry if my rant struck a nerve on the whole Poland thing, but Soviet Union wasn't so nice to Poland before or after World War II, really. The whole attacking Poland and making a deal with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact and everything like that. I don't know. Tankies just seem to forget that part. And I know you're not a tanky. I know you're an ANCOM, but I don't know how to reconcile what the Soviets did in Poland. Anyways, moving on. Let's talk about DQuack's question, or DQuack's scenario. If the USA were to collapse, when in the future would it collapse? If you had to put a date on it. Oh, geez. I don't really see the U.S. collapsing so much as diminishing. I can see the U.S. sticking its bonds that keep it together are pretty strong. Actually, I don't think that any of those separatist movements or anything like that are going to happen. I just see the United States getting into a situation where nobody is going to want. Look who's here. I just don't see it. I see it getting into a situation where it's just no longer like just a mere fragment of what it used to be. Hello. Anyways, where were we? I know that I know exactly the chat's gonna be incapacitated for several minutes while we deal with the fact that there's a cat in my lap, because this is super important. Because it is, because she is a great cat. You are a good cat. You are a very good cat. What if fantasy creatures coexisted with actual medieval politics? How would that affect medieval history? Oh, geez. Depends on the fantasy creatures, I guess. Hmm. All right. What if Britain was a minor empire and France took all of the 13 colonies in Canada? Oh boy. Okay, let's talk about that a bit, I guess. Hey Phoebe, you gonna look at the camera? No? No, you don't want to look at the camera? Okay. Okay, so if Britain was a minor empire, so how would we... Dear God, it's a cat. This is extraordinary. Someone alert the press. Okay, so how would Britain become a minor empire? I would think that maybe... So Britain actually had a pretty rough time with its first few colonial attempts. Maybe that sours them to the idea, and they just don't get involved with, like, after, like, the failure of, like... Maybe, like, Jamestown turns out to be a huge disaster, and so they just kind of give up after that. That might be interesting. So there's a couple things we could probably add to that would make things interesting. France was never super... Are you going to do a follow-up to your Khashoggi video? If so, are you going to wait a bit longer until more details come out so you don't feel like you have to do another video on it? Yeah, I feel like if I'm going to follow up on it, that I would need to have something new to deal with. Right. So France. So France was not super invested in its colonies. Like, it liked them and all, but, like, the idea of throwing tons and tons of people and resources into running the into colonization, like, they had a lot of territory but very few people. So if the United States never took the eastern coast of the United States, for example, France would probably claim it, except for maybe the Netherlands part. I feel like the Netherlands would keep the Manhattan part, but France would claim it, but then they would probably have nobody there because France had trouble getting people to go over. And they had a different colonial process. They very much had a more hands-off approach to colonizing, which meant that they would send fewer people and then they would make more money by trading with the indigenous people in the region, or by the big thing that they were into, at least in Quebec, was fur trapping. I'm not sure if Quebec would get into the cash crop aspect like the English would. Because... oh, there she goes. Sorry, everybody. But, yeah, the whole concept of, like the British were really into, like, cash crops. The French were into, like, furs and pelts and stuff. And the Spanish were into, like, mineral wealth, like mines and gold and silver and everything like that. So I don't know if their goals would change if they all of a sudden found themselves with the eastern coast of the United States, or if this would result in something that's a little bit more relaxed and hands-off. Maybe the colonization happens with more of a light touch, and North America is largely, not really interfered with a whole lot. Without the British, you don't have the 7 Years' War. And Spain would probably start to encroach in that area as well. Spain was fairly involved in their holdings in Central and South America, so you could very well see them moving into... They had Florida as well, so they could have moved north. You might have seen more of a rivalry between the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. that would be interesting to see if that goes through. Be interesting to see. Because Spain and France were typically pretty good allies. But yeah. I don't know if you wouldn't really... I don't know if you have a United States. Honestly, I think that if you had it so that the British never got involved, unless the French start getting really into tobacco or something like that, I don't see a very highly populated North America. You might have it so that, like, by modern day, all of, like, the rich countries in the Americas are like in Mexico and South America, and that, like, North America is sort of this, like, cold, backwatery place that's mostly Spanish and French people with, like, a large indigenous population. Be an interesting place. I'd like to see what those countries shake out to, especially as, like, post-colonialism happens, but... I bet the Dutch would have probably a bigger role in that too, as well. Back in Europe, though, England not having all the colonies, like, the thing is that, like, the American colonies that you're talking about is something called the First British Empire. Then there was the Second British Empire that was way more focused on the Caribbean, on India, on Africa, on Australia, and, like, do the British do that? Maybe they do it earlier. Maybe they don't do it at all. And if that's the case, then, like, the whole power dynamic of Europe gets thrown in a whack, because who becomes the powerhouse of Europe at that point? Is it Spain? Does Spain just become, like, world leader? I don't know. There's a whole lot. There's a whole lot of stuff that's getting shaped around there, and it'd be hard to tell where things shake out by that point. But the one thing I could say is that the world would definitely be a lot more Catholic today. I imagine that the Protestant Reformation would not be as big a deal if it wasn't for English colonization. I guess it'd be Dutch colonization, but you know. All right. So we have some questions. Don Trump 901. Do you think transhumanism can be incorporated positively into a multicultural system and expand into forming a multi-species structure of different human descendants? That's a weird way to... if anything, I would think that... like, I'm not, like... Are you talking about, like, genetically engineering different backgrounds of people into different types of things? Like, that sounds very, like, Gattaca or something. So, like, a future where, like, we've, like, genetically engineered... Because it sounds like genetic engineering, where, like, we've genetically engineered people. Or are you talking about, like, a multicultural... like, based on what kind of different types of augmentations people have? So there's, like, cyborgs, and then there's, like, the transgenic people, and then there's, like, the... I'm not sure where to go. I'm not sure where that goes. I'm not sure which one wins out there. But I would think that the more common transhumanist thing will be is that we'll all have a mix of all of them. I know, because one of the things I wanted to... Maybe this is the thing I should write about. I wanted to do a science fiction story at some point where genetic engineering... where, like, the way that genetic engineering works, because they're always, like, updating and doing things, that you end up with something called version mismatch, which is that you end up with tribes of people who stick around because only people like if you've got the human DNA version 1.1, and then you know the people who are selling DNA version 1.2 don't make the children that are born with that reverse compatible, then, like, people with 1.1 genes and 1.2 genes, like, maybe they even put it in place so that if you buy, like, a different... Like, if the designer DNA for your baby you purchase is of like one brand, then like they can't interbreed with another brand, and like that would lead to like almost like brand control of people, like kind of like if people started if like we had these transgenic kids and then also applied the kind of like skeezy shit that like Monsanto does with crops on kids, and I could see all sorts of weird stuff happening. That's it's an interesting idea, but I'm not sure where that would go. But honestly, I think that we can have like I every time I like this was somebody earlier today made some weird comment about how they are like they were trying to make an argument for having a not racist idea about being against race mixing because they just think all the races are so beautiful and they shouldn't change. And it's like, like that's not what multiculturalism is. Multiculturalism is just embracing difference. It's not about trying to force difference to be the way it is. Like that, it's just letting things be the way they are and celebrating that some people are not like other people. That's fine. Like there's no problem with that. But I'm trying to think what like some sort of like transhumanist technology impact on humans would lead to different groups. I do think that for the most part, we'll end up getting all of them. We'll probably like everybody will probably end up being genetically engineered and also cyborgs. But honestly, I do think that those kinds of technologies I have severe fears about being implemented when with capitalism. I think that if we start putting in designer genes on people, if we start like genetically engineering people with under a capitalist model, we're gonna end up with some really creepy shit. Like the example I talked about, where like they would like put like planned obsolescence or things like that, so that if your kid is of one brand, they can't breed with another brand or something like that. I'd be surprised. Yeah. But like I would love, like the thing is that like there's so much promise. Like I'm not like a Luddite. Like I think that if we applied genetic engineering to humans, we could help so much. There is so much disease that we could handle. Like we could get rid of cystic fibrosis and multiple sclerosis in like a generation, which would be it would be so good for alleviating human suffering. But I know that like no capitalist company is going to do it in any way that even comes close to equitable. And when people make things, even when they think they're making things for the good of humanity, they're going to put in things that are going to help them increase profits, but not necessarily make the world a better place. Like maybe they'll make like I can honestly see like if Monsanto starts selling the designer baby stuff, they'll be like, well, yeah, like we have to do this, but like it's great. You're going to be super strong and super powerful, but you're going to need this drug in order to like keep yourself like not sick. And so, you're going to have to take your Ketracel White in order to keep yourself like, to keep all of these new superpowers around. And like, you have to buy the Ketracel White that only Monsanto brand genetic designer kids need. And then you'll find out that Ketracel White is just this thing they put in so that you are completely dependent on them your entire life. And it keeps brand things going. And the government, because the government, supports capitalism, they'll probably say, well, that's their right. Your parents chose to put that genes inside you. So that's, completely up to them. And we're definitely going to crack down on anybody making like pirated version of the Ketracel White. And so, I think like the Ketracel White thing, the reason I say that is because it is, to me, like the most, like, if capitalism started genetically engineering people, the Ketracel White situation in DS9 is like the most common thing that would happen, which was in Deep Space Nine, there were these aliens that were kept under control by another race of aliens They were genetically engineered by this progenitor race, and the progenitor race kept them under control because they needed this drug called Ketracel White that if they did not get a regular supply of it at all time, they would die. And whenever there was like a time when there was like one mutant, they were called the Jem'Hadar. There was one mutant episode where one of them was like a mutant and didn't need the Ketracel White. And when that happened, the founders, which is like the progenitor race, they like hunted them down and like tried to kill them. So, I could see it happening. I could definitely see, kids who need a drug that you can only buy from one company, and like if that company declares Chapter 11, like what happens? I don't know. Version mismatch where they can't have kids with each other. I could see that. I could see all sorts of horrors being unleashed if we go through this technology with capitalism. Food, not bad. Food and capitalism, bad. Sex, not bad. Food and sex and capitalism, bad. A trend, as in a sense. Yep. You could buy meth in the drugstore. Sirloin of ice. Meth was actually available everywhere at that point. There was actually, in the 1950s in the United States, there was a drug called Mommy's Little Helper that was basically meth. It's like bored housewives were doing meth in the 1950s because being a woman in the suburbs in the 1950s was probably a living nightmare. So I don't blame them. So yeah, it was the whole like prohibition on drugs thing is a relatively recent phenomenon. Have you traveled within Canada, and if so, where to? Well, Neve, I have traveled. I have been to 7 of the 10 provinces, and I have not been to any territories. So, I have not been to Nunavut or the Northwest Territories or the Yukon, and I've also not been to Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, or PEI. But I've been to every other province. So I've been to New Brunswick. I lived in Quebec for several years. I've lived in Ontario most of my life. I've been to Manitoba several times because my mom's side of the family lives in Saskatchewan. And so we often fly to Winnipeg and drive over. And then I've done several trips. I think the last time was like when I was about maybe 10 or 11, where we went from Saskatchewan out west all the way to British Columbia. So I've seen Alberta and BC that way. Where did I go when I went to BC? I went to Vancouver. Where else do you go? I went to Vancouver. I went to the Pacific. I don't really know many details because I was like 10. I think I went to Kelowna for a wedding. That was like the reason we went one time. So I think I've been to Kelowna. New Brunswick, I went to New Brunswick. I went to St. Andrews by the Sea. I went on this trip where went down from Quebec into Massachusetts, and we saw like Boston, and then we went up through like Connecticut and Vermont and Maine, and then I went up into New Brunswick to St. Andrews by the Sea, and then we drove back down to Sherbrooke, where I was going to university at the time. Good night, Cryptosporidium. Have a good rest. All right, Glitch42. What if the IWW won the labor race against the AFL? Oh, okay. That's some real insider American labor history stuff right there. Have you heard about the Islamist extremists that worked for the Nazis? Probably. If you knew you were able to live a really long, healthy life, what would your time frame of choice in history to live? I always say the 1900s, like the turn of the century. I feel like there was a lot of really cool stuff going on. It'd be cool to be involved in that. Tristan, do the business plot question yet? No, I haven't. What if Bacon's Rebellion had succeeded? Oh man. All right, I'm not even gonna get close to the end of this list by the end, so I'll have to save them. I think. We'll see where we go. IWW won the labor race against the AFL. I don't have a whole lot that I can say to this. The IWW was pretty big, but it never had the same amount of support. I feel like the IWW winning out over the AFL implies an American culture that is very different than the one that existed in our timeline. One that's way more radical, in which case you would see much more socialism and much more revolt and revolution in the United States in a way that I don't think we would be able to map out or appreciate very well because, the IWW just did not have a lot of cultural support outside of like Montana. But I like the idea. And the IWW still exists to this day. It's just that radical labor at the time was controversial. And I wonder, so for them to like become like the predominant thing implies that American culture would be pretty different. How old are you? This relates to my second question. I am 29. I am about 34 days away from turning 30. I turned 30 in November. Maybe I'll do a stream on my birthday. Would that be fun? Actually, I think my birthday is on a Tuesday, so that was going to happen anyway. Yep, my birthday's on a Tuesday, so yeah, I guess I'll be streaming on my birthday. That'll be fun. Maybe I'll show up a bit late, or maybe I'll drink, or maybe I'll do something during the stream to celebrate turning 30. That'd be fun. Because I think we're doing my birthday party like the weekend before, so it'll already be done. You said you studied 9/11, right? Yes. I did one master's thesis. My American Studies master's thesis was on post 9/11 Islamophobia, and I released it in 2014, talking about how with the thesis that that Islamophobia was transforming from the early 2000s to the late 2000s from one of anxiety to one of hatred that would be much more long-term and much more much more into violence and repression. And then the month that I handed in my thesis, all the stuff with ISIS happened. Like, ISIS started to make the news. Which, like, I hate it when I'm right. It led to all sorts of horrible shit happening. Some light pot, if you've got it, smoke it. I can't smoke in I can't smoke in here. My landlords don't let me. So I'd have to go up to the roof or something, but I could definitely, get on board with that. So you were 12 when 9/11 happened, and yes, almost 12-year-olds and younger don't know what they want to do when they're older, but couldn't know you wanted to study 9/11 because it hasn't happened yet. Yeah, I did not know that I was going to study 9/11 the day, like, when it happened. It was actually something that came to me when I was older. My interest in 9/11 didn't really peak until I started going to grad school. So I did my American Studies thesis on Islamophobia, which interested me because Islamophobia, if you watched a bunch of my videos, you know that there's a strong subtext of anti-Islamophobia. But on top of that, and sometimes it's just text. And then on top of that, my second master's, my history master's, was about rebuilding Ground Zero after 9/11, and my PhD was about integrating about collective trauma and integrating 9/11 into a collective past so that we can sort of frame it as a story so that we could make it part of our history. And that's what I said. That's what I was thinking about. But yeah, when 9/11 happened, I was 12. almost 13. I was in 8th grade. Can you make a video about Sun Tzu's Art of War and how people to this day use Sun Tzu's strategy and tactics? I've been wanting to do this a little bit. Like, there's one video that I've been wanting to make for a while, ever since I started Step Back, but I feel like the time has never been right for me to make it, and I never really knew how to do it right, which is that the fundamental difference between Western culture and Eastern culture when it comes to warfare, and how it boils down to 2 board games. How Western cultures play chess and Eastern cultures play Go, and how Go exemplifies a different thought approach to warfare than chess does. And it's why people who think like Go players tend to beat people who think like chess players. And you see this in like Vietnam. You saw this in the American Revolution, that when you think of things like territory control and you don't see things like in tactics and movements, you're going to be more successful. And that means that if you want to be a good military strategist, that Go is a way better game to play than chess. Second, that's not really a question, but something I thought of that. The U.S. public doesn't know about 70 plus years of U.S. repression in the Middle East, Iranian coup, Gulf War, etc., etc. Yeah, and before it was the U.S., it was the British. So, and before the British, it was the Ottomans. So, you know, the Middle East really hasn't had people not screwing with them for a very long time. Hence why the region is such a mess. Honestly, like, you want to have peace in the Middle East, leave them the fuck alone for a bit, and they'll figure it out. Do you think the reaction and legacy of 9/11 is very Western-centric and overrated because that many people have died other times, or the reaction is justified and it was world-changing? Honestly, at this point, like 3,000 people died. So, like, 9/11 still, like, I think that, like, there's no undermining that, like, 9/11 was the most deadly terrorist attack in human history. There's one in Lebanon that kind of comes close. It has about 1,500, but the fact that 3,000 people died on 9/11 is a huge deal. Then the war on terror as a response means that I think that now, 17 years and change later, that 9/11 is at least well known for being a sort of linchpin moment for 21st century history. Like, Osama bin Laden did plan to do the attack because he knew it would have this effect. And so, yeah, I think that it's significant. I mean, it's an important part of history now, anyways. Okay. Would the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki be considered war crimes and crimes against humanity? That would be nice, but unfortunately, we learned in World War II that allies can't commit war crimes because they won, basically. Yeah. All right. What if the United States fell to communism in the early 1900s? All right. So, like, first Red Scare type time. Oh boy, that would really reshape the world, because after World War I, the United States became like, so like in this timeline, because you said 1900s, not like 19 teens, and that would really mean that the United States becomes the first communist superpower, or the first communist country, which would be huge. Because the United States, like, all right, so like, we're like, first of all, the United States probably wouldn't get involved in World War One. Now, the war was still pretty much done by the time the United States got involved in World War One, but like without the U.S. support throughout things, and you could see a Central Power victory in World War One maybe because the U.S. just not being involved in it whatsoever, and then the Soviet Union probably still happening, and so the Soviet Union backing out, or even more so because if the U.S. became a communist country in like the 1900s, then like who knows who else would be inspired by said ideas. Like when Woodrow Wilson came to the Treaty of Versailles with the 14 points and everything like that, like so many other countries like the Koreans and the Vietnamese and all sorts of other people came as like a delegation to Paris to try and negotiate for him to apply his 14 points to them, and he was far too racist to actually let that happen. But U.S. ideas, the U.S.'s like ideas would have carried a lot of weight, and so yeah, who knows who would have become communist right away. It's a pretty that is a very big change at a very a very tumultuous time in human history. Like things could have changed very drastically in that period. It'd be interesting to see. I would be genuinely curious to see what a communist United States would look like, because America is such an ideologically driven country. It's so driven by ideals and, the whole great experiment idea, that I imagine that a communist America would think that it was, living up to the idea of liberty and equality, liberty, and justice for all. And I would love to see a communist America that is like, yeah, we believe in justice for all, hence like communism. Like that's what it meant. That's what the founding, like I'd love to see like the US Supreme Court that's going like, yeah, I mean like it says like communism is enshrined in the Constitution, and like the founding fathers were involved. Like the founding fathers would have believed in communism and like all that kind of stuff. And it'd be really interesting to see the reinterpretation of US history through the lens of a communist modern America. Do you think Trotsky would succeed in expanding communism worldwide if he came to power and got rid of Stalin? No. I think that he would have antagonized things even worse. Trotsky wanted to have international communism. Trotsky started the Red Army with the intent of basically conquering the world and forcing it all to become communist, with the idea that was very much like George Bush, where they would be greeted as liberators, which would not always be the case, in my opinion. I think that, you saw a little bit of what Trotsky would do in Finland and Poland and Estonia, Lithuania, and such. I feel like the Trotsky's Soviet Union would be scary. It would be, because he was not like some libertine, like he was not some like left wing or anti-authoritarian or anything like that. Like he was still very much like, yeah, tanky, authoritarian. He just was against Stalin because Stalin was much more about trying to secure communism at home, and Trotsky was way more about like, no, we need to like make a fucking army and take over the world. So like, I see like people, I see the Red Scare being even worse, because then you have the Soviet Union openly saying that they plan on using through military force, making all the other countries of the world become communist. And I imagine people would freak the fuck out over that. What if the U.S. had remained isolationist and not joined World War II? Maybe if they struck a deal with Japan or something. Add that on the list. We're totally not going to make it to the end, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just collect these ideas and save them, and, when we come back to it next month, I can open it up, or hopefully don't forget about it. What if Alexander the Great didn't conquer Greece and couldn't expand the empire? I don't know. Oh, I guess I'll put that on the list because that actually could be pretty fun. With the Germans, oh my goodness. Okay, there's so many. Okay. Twice in one day. Yeah, Big Seltzer. I am running very low on body energy resources. Hence why I'm talking so slow, I think. Yeah, because I did a random stream while I was waiting for my data to transfer at the YouTube space earlier today, and then, this was scheduled, so here we are. Boxy Lemons wants to know what the world would be like if all of the fantasy creatures existed. That I don't even know. I don't even know where to start with that one. All right, D-Quack. What would happen if the nationalists won the Chinese Civil War? I don't think it would. Some people say it would be different, but I think that I don't think it would be that different. China would become a capitalist stooge for the rest of the world. Be very much like it would still probably be pretty authoritarian, maybe less censored than it is today, but it would probably still be a fairly authoritarian state. I think. I don't like that much industrial capacity. I don't think that any of the rich Western countries would have much of an interest in such a powerful country becoming too free to make decisions. I say this a lot when I was a teacher, too. Like, for example, most Western countries would never want Saudi Arabia to become a democracy. They might say they do, but if you think about it, nobody, for international capitalism to function, Saudi Arabia has to be a dictatorship. It has to be a kingdom. Because if you think about the global economy, anytime Saudi Arabia was having an election, the economy would lose its shit. Oil speculators would go crazy. Because what if Saudi Arabia elected somebody who decided to they would totally the election issues in Saudi Arabia would totally be about whether we should use oil to whether we should restrict oil to certain places that we have disagreements with, whether we should save it for ourselves. There'd be all sorts of issues, and oil is the number one resource in Saudi Arabia. And so Saudi Arabia, if it every time that it was election season, you would see the economy go haywire. Same thing with China, in my opinion, is that if China were to ever become a democracy, the entire global economy would go crazy every time there was a Chinese election. Even now, even though the Chinese have mock elections that don't really change much, with Xi Jinping basically solidifying his power as a singular dictator for life. IMHB just said, "Hi, Dad. I think you might have the wrong Twitch channel there, bud." Anyways, so there would be a lot of international interest in making sure that China does not become a democratic country. So it would probably become an absolute monarchy, kind of like Saudi Arabia, in order to keep the economy running the way they want to. What if the process of desertification never formed the Sahara Desert and it was all savanna? Oh my. So, what would a imperial or a nationalist China look like? So, you can look at the example of Taiwan. Taiwan is still a fairly authoritarian country. It's not like China levels, but Taiwan is still pretty, like that. It's still pretty hardcore in that sense. And so, I would just imagine that China would just be very much like China today. It's just that they might have a more open and free internet, because their economy would still be pretty controlled by So, I don't know. I think that, like, as for, like, fighting the Chinese and stuff like that, I don't see a ton being different. Maybe I'm being silly, but I don't... Like, the government would still be authoritarian, and it would still be very capitalist. The only difference is that, like, laws that would be put in place would be focused around... Might not have the Great Leap Forward, which would be huge, because, like, then China would be much less industrialized, which in that case, you would have a situation in which industrial production around the world is much more distributed, or India would become the next... would become China. Maybe, like, without the Great Leap Forward, the industrial capacity of the world would be way lower. And so how that would affect things, I mean, goods would be more expensive. We'd probably be a little bit... things would be a lot different anyway. That'd be interesting to think about. If they don't do that. But maybe they would. Without the 5-year plans and everything like that, maybe the Chinese economy wouldn't be this, like, roaring takeoff, which would mean that, like, certain companies would never be able to get off the ground. Like, without cheap Chinese production, companies like Walmart would never be the things that they are today. I would think that under, like, Emperor Chiang Kai-shek or something like that, you would probably not see... Hello, Michael Collins. You would probably not see the same level of, like, without the planned economy and things like that. I don't know. Vietnam would probably be a pretty short war, because the Chinese gave a lot of support with that. The Korean War would have not happened, which means that the Vietnam War might also not have happened. You might have seen more republics. Yeah, because, like, the Korean War wouldn't have even started, because communism's influence in East Asia probably wouldn't have been nearly as big. And so the Soviet Union would be, like the communist side of the Cold War would be very, very contained. Oh, boy. So maybe you'd have, like, an early end to the Cold War. That could be a thing. That'd be quite a thing. Or you'd have the Soviet Union and the Cold War just not being as big a deal, because the fall of China made the United States and a lot of the West, like, really freak out about, like, the dangerous rise of communism. But, like, maybe if maybe the fight over Eastern Europe would be, like, the only flashpoint. I'm not exactly sure where that would go, though. At that point, you're doing some very different stuff. All right. How long would what if Bolivar or Santa Maria had managed to hold Gran Colombia together? Oh boy, that would have been a task. I'm gonna put on my list. All right. So the next one I got here is how long would the Aztec Empire have lasted if the Americas were never discovered? I guess that's more of a question. Probably not as long as people think. The thing about the the Aztec Empire is that it was on the grow, so it would have lasted probably quite a bit longer. But it was an empire that was on flimsy foundations. It was an empire built up by what's it called? Tributary states, tributary city-states. Which is never a stable system. The reason why the Aztec Empire collapsed so quickly when the Spanish showed up was because the Spanish did not need to convince very many Aztec city-states to join their cause to overthrow the Aztecs. The Aztecs were, like, the people who ruled from Tenochtitlan were, like, Moctezuma II was not popular in a lot of places. They had lots of tributary states. They would regularly invade their own territory in order to claim war captives to sacrifice to Huitzilopochtli. Huitzilopochtli, and, like, that whole thing would have probably collapsed like a deck of cards some point. The Spanish didn't have guns. What they did have is, yeah, they had horses and armor. That was a big deal. But they didn't have guns. Or they did, but they weren't really useful. They didn't really use them either. They had, like, basic arquebuses in the 1520s, but nothing that, like, you could really use in combat. Like, they were used more as, like, noisemakers. They did have swords, they had armor, they had horses, but even then, they wouldn't have been able to wipe out an entire nation with the small amount of people that Cortez had with him. So it was really because they were able to completely upend the Mesoamerican political order and overthrow those, get those tributary states to turn on Tenochtitlan. That was really the big deal, because of the help of of Malinche, his translator. Oh my! All right, let me just take some of these down. Yeah, they had 2 arquebuses in the first of Cortez's army. That sounds about right. Like, they were noisemakers. They were not useful in any particular way. And if the if it wasn't for, like, if the Aztecs knew to, like, just throw out the crumb bombs, they would have been able to do it very easily. Like, even if they're just fighting with macahuatas and you know, spears and stuff like that, they would have been able to throw out. I think there was not that many Spaniards in Cortez's original expedition. All right. Yeah. All right. Jacob Rodriguez. What would be your reaction if you go to the year 5000 AD and you see what humans have returned to primitive civilization, hunter-gatherers? I would be not surprised. If I would assume that some sort of apocalyptic thing has happened and we are kind of building up from scratch, which would make me sad, but it would not surprise me if in like 3000 years we have completely destroyed the earth and we're like starting over. That sounds, I would be sad, but I would not be surprised. Don Trump 901, what are your thoughts on Maoism, the Peruvian philosophy, not just Mao Zedong thought? I don't even know the first thing about that. I'm sorry. I don't really have a way to answer you. Yeah. Einstein once said that World War IV would be fought with sticks and stones. Yeah, somebody said, when do you think what do you think World War III will be fought with? And he said, where will World War III be fought? And he said, I don't know where World War III will be fought, but I know that World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. Which I do not disagree with. Because near the end of his life, Einstein was a champion for creating a global government, and that if we did not put together a global government and find some way to make sure that we never have war again, that because of the atomic bomb, humanity's days were numbered. And there were a lot of people who thought this at the end of World War II. And I wrote an essay on Einstein's sort of global government pacifist ideology that he really got concerned about at the end of World War II. And I think that it was a really interesting thing. So I have a question. So everybody was talking about this. So, like, is there some sort of issue with the Amazon Basics controller that I don't know? Is it bad? It seems fine. I've never had a console controller ever, so I don't know if it's good or not, but we shall see when I do the thing. Um. All right. I think I'm gonna wind down a little bit early tonight, guys, because I had the whole thing today, and I feel a little tired and burnt out, and my throat's starting to go. So I think I'm gonna need I think I'm gonna need to take a break. So this has been a really great stream. I think you guys have been really fun, and I look forward to these all the time. So I'll see you guys on Thursday for the stream before the next video that comes out, my Halloween video. And then next week we're going to do some more Assassin's Creed. And I wrote down the alternate history ideas that people submitted, so I'll pick them up for next time we go into it. Anyways, you guys have a great night. See you guys next time.